Thank you for joining us today for our Contracting 101 webinar. I know we still got people heading in and joining us, but we have a lot of exciting content to cover today. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. So my name is Chelsea Exlebeski. I am the Innovation Connect Manager here at UK Innovate. I exclusively support our College of Medicine and Healthcare Life Science campus under UK Innovate. So for those of you who may not know much about UK Innovate, we'll give a brief overview. So as you can see highlighted on the left is our Innovation Connect team. Our group is really here to support industry, nonprofit, and private sector partnerships for research and innovation. And so understandably so, a lot of that engaging with external partners contract based. So I work with most everyone here that's going to be presenting today. We also have an innovation training group. So if you're interested in taking a micro certification program to learn more about innovation, translational research, et cetera, please reach out and we can provide you with more information. We also have a group that covers social innovation. A lot of times people think about innovation as, oh, I have to have a new drug or a new device or a new engineering widget or tool. But a lot of times there's stuff going on here at campus that has a lot of really exciting and important societal impact for yourself, the communities you serve, Kentucky at large, or even on a national scale. So we have a team dedicated to those innovations. And then last but certainly not least, we have our technology commercialization group. So if you have invented something that you think could be patented, copyrighted, or trademarked, please reach out to this group. We have an awesome team of commercialization managers, an intellectual property team, as well as a contracts team. And today you'll be hearing from two of our wonderful attorneys in our contracts team from our Office of Technology Commercialization. So we have an amazing panel of speakers and participants today. I want to give a round of applause and a shout out to all of these incredible women who've taken time out of their very busy schedules to participate, to share with us the type of contracts and agreements that they deal with, and when these type of agreements are needed, how we all work together across campus to facilitate these. And so I do have our speakers in order. So I'm going to go ahead and kick it off with Natalie McCormick from our Office of Technology Commercialization. She's going to be covering non-disclosure and confidentiality agreements. And then Ali Yankee, who's going to be covering material transfer agreements and data use agreements. So with that, Natalie, I will kick it over to you.
Thanks, Chelsea. I'm Natalie McCormick, and as Chelsea said, I'm part of OTC, the Office of Technology Commercialization. I'm part of our contracts team, and we negotiate and manage agreements related to intellectual property for UK's licensing portfolio. In addition to those IP agreements, I also handle all confidentiality and non-disclosure agreements related to research for the university. And so what I'm here to briefly talk about today is what those NDAs or CDAs are used for, what information is needed for a request, and what to do after your NDA is signed. There's a lot of ground to cover, as Chelsea mentioned, so I'm going to be talking quickly, but you can always reach out to our office with any questions you have. So let's get started. The NDA, it's a binding contract that establishes a confidential relationship between two or more parties who wish to have private, non-public discussions and share confidential or proprietary information. Some examples, of course, is intellectual property, personal or business information, inventions, know-how, or even certain research. We have NDAs. They can be mutual, with both parties sharing confidential information and both parties agreeing to protect that information, or one way, with only one party sharing information and the other party agreeing to protect that confidential information. UK's OTC is the authorized signatory for all of the NDAs. The university signature binds its employees to the confidentiality agreement. Employees includes faculty, staff, and researchers. NDAs are used to talk to a specific party about a potential collaboration or research project. So there should be no funded work performed under the NDA. There should be no work or research that could result in an invention or the creation of intellectual property under an NDA. The NDA is what I like to call the first step in fleshing out your collaboration with the other party. The reason the university uses NDAs is to ensure that there's sufficient protections in place before you share any UK confidential information with another party. If you have confidential information and disclose it to a third party without an NDA, you could expose UK or yourself to potential liability. If you don't have an NDA and you disclose a potentially patentable invention that is not yet protected, it could be considered a public disclosure, and then your ability to obtain any patent protection could be lost. Our NDAs require parties to take reasonable measures to ensure information disclosed under the agreement is both confidential, and it prohibits the parties from disclosing to unauthorized third parties. The point is, this way, the point is the confidential information is only used by those who you want to use it, and then for the purpose you want it used for. Next slide, please. So after you know a little bit about NDAs, what information do you need for an NDA? You can make a request to our office. You can email me. If you forget who to contact, you can email anyone in our office and we'll get you to the right person. We also have a fillable NDA request form on our website that you can complete and email to us. When you make your request there for an NDA, there is specific information that we'll need to collect from you in order to draft the agreement or review the agreement. And then, of course, we'll follow up with any additional questions or information we might need. Some of the information we definitely need is, of course, the other party's information, your contact person, and always a short description of the topic of discussion or project. This would include any inventions that you might have disclosed to our office through the submission of an invention disclosure. We ask our researchers to provide us with this information so that we can tailor our NDAs to the research or collaboration topic, and all parties are clear on what is covered under the NDA. And we can also make sure any UK confidential information being shared is appropriately protected and covered under the NDA. We also ask you if your NDA is clinical, meaning it's a research confidentiality agreement specifically related to a potential clinical trial or study wherein UK is being considered as a potential study site. Typically, clinical NDAs, you will see them as one way with the sponsor sharing information with UK. Our office, OTC, handles all research NDAs, which does include clinical NDAs, but in partnership with my colleague Jessica Heskell with UK Center of Clinical and Translational Science. She'll be speaking later. She assists with review of our clinical NDAs, even though they're still housed with our office. So if you have any questions or are unsure whether you have a research or clinical NDA, you can contact Jessica or me, and we can make sure the appropriate person assists you with getting that NDA in place. We also have a standard NDA template that we prefer to use when negotiating NDAs. It makes it usually quicker and more efficient to get that NDA in place, and you can start sharing your confidential information sooner. However, if the other party prefers to use their NDA format, we can certainly do that as well. We'll just review the NDA for edits needed from the university standpoint. Next slide. So now your NDA, you made your request, your NDA is signed. So what do you do next? Well, once it's in place and it's been fully executed, you can start your discussions under the agreement. If you're the primary contact or principal investigator for the NDA and for UK, then you're responsible for providing and or receiving confidential information, and depending on the purpose, sharing that information with other employees if permitted under the NDA. Something important to note here is if you must share confidential information with other university employees, you need to make sure all those employees are told about the NDA, that confidential information is being shared, that information is confidential, and they are bound through their employment to maintain that confidentiality. Also, if required, and as a good general practice, you should make sure any UK confidential information you share and provide to the other party is marked confidential. You can do this by adding confidential to each page of your document, stamping all information confidential, or placing confidential in your email subject line, or even saving the document as with the word confidential. You only want to use your confidential information for the NDA's purpose, and you don't want to disclose it to anyone unless you're specifically permitted to do so under the agreement. You want to use common sense in protecting and keeping the information secured, store any confidential information in a password protected computer or file, lock the information in a filing cabinet or a room with limited access, or even when discussing information, make sure you do so in private. If you discover that any confidential information has been accessed by an unauthorized person, notify our office, your department, and UK's Office of Legal Counsel immediately so we can all work together and prevent any further access or exposure. Next slide. In brief, here are our contacts for NDAs. You can contact me with any NDA question, or you can contact Jessica Heskell with clinical NDAs. If you're unsure, contact either one of us. That was a very quick overview of NDAs in a nutshell, but I'm going to turn this now over to Allie and for DUAs and MTAs.
Wonderful. Thank you, Natalie. Quick housekeeping note, if any of you have questions during the webinar, please drop them in the Q&A section. We will have time at the end of the webinar for these questions. And then also this is being recorded and we will send out the link to all of you. So Allie, off to you.
Sorry, I was talking to myself. I was muted. If we can just move forward to the next slide. I'm going to be giving a very brief overview today of material transfer agreements and data use agreements. Just as an introduction, Allie Yankee, I've been with OTC almost 7 years now. And in my line of work, I deal with mainly our material transfer agreements and our DUAs, although I have handled NDAs in the past, and I also handle license agreements, interinstitutional agreements, option agreements, any contract that comes to our office. So to start, we're going to talk about material transfer agreements. The overarching rule here is that anytime material is leaving the university, you must have a material transfer agreement in place. This is a university policy, university-wide, so it doesn't matter what college, it doesn't matter which department, you must have an MTA in place if this is material that's leaving the university for research purposes. So the MTA is needed because we need to protect not only the university, but we're trying to protect the individual researcher. For example, if you have material that you have developed and you have put a lot of your time and your energy and work into this material, but you want to share it with a colleague at the University of Tennessee, for example, you can do that. But we want to make sure that that colleague at the University of Tennessee is very clear on what they can do with your material and how they can use your material and who they can share your material with. All of those things we can do within a material transfer agreement. If you don't have an MTA, that's when those researcher, whoever has access to your material, who you give access to your material, can basically, they have no restrictions on what they can do with that material. Next slide, please. So there are a couple common MTAs that we use, and if you've done an MTA, you've probably seen one of these. The first one that we have here is the University of Kentucky's MTA. This is the template we've used for years. We tweak it every year, depending on what we've seen, what we've come across. The second MTA on your screen is going to be the cover sheet for NIH's simple letter agreement. This is for materials that really don't need a lot of restrictions. Like the entire agreement is only several clauses long. We see this a lot with NIH transfers. And then the third agreement on your screen is just the front cover of the UBMTA implementing letter. The UBMTA is the Universal Biological Material Transfer Agreement. This is actually a longer MTA. It's several pages long, the terms, but they have been signed off on by most institutions across the United States. They have all agreed to these exact same terms, and several international institutions as well. So all we have to do is fill out this implementing form. It asks who's providing the material, who is receiving the material, what is the material, and it can account for the length of time that the researchers that receiving the material is allowed to use their material, as well as any shipping costs. This is what we try to use. Everybody's familiar with the terms. The terms are generally accepted. The only university I've come across that does not have a blanket acceptance of the UBMTA is Duke. So I would like to think that should tell you something, but I won't go any further as that. Next slide, please. If you want to do an MTA, the information that we're going to need, similar to an NDA, we need to know who you're sharing material with. A lot of the times, if you get an MTA in, we're also going to handle that. So while we require an MTA for all outgoing material, a lot of other institutions have that exact same policy. So you're going to be receiving MTAs as well. Just send those to me. I can review those. We'll need to know exactly who you're sending it to, who their contract person is. That way I can reach out to them if we need to negotiate the terms. We need a description of the project in which the material will be used. We need to know who owns the material. So maybe you want to share a sample that you've received from another institute with institution A. Now you want to share it with the institution B. We can work around those things, especially if there's a first MTA. We can work with institution A and say, hey, we now want to do a collaboration with institution B. How can we get that set up? That's something that I can help you with. And then we need to know anything about time constraints. So for example, if you're shipping live animals, we need to know that. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to give a very brief introduction to data use agreements. I've given hour-long presentations on data use agreements. These can kind of, they branch out. So there's a lot of different variations. Overarching, you're going to have a data use agreement in place when you share data. Similar to an MTA or an NDA, when data is leaving the university, we do require a data use agreement. There are different reasons that we require data use agreements than an MTA requirement. Some of the same reasons, again, maybe this is a data set that the researcher has worked really hard on. There's been a lot of hours put into it. We want to protect that. We want to restrict the other institution, the receiving institution, how they can use that data, what they can use it for, who they can give access to. But there's also further restrictions if you want to transfer data that is patient data, and we're going to have more restrictions if you're transferring patient data. That's when we have security terms that we have to make sure are implemented. So the form on your screen can be found on the Federal Demonstration Project's website. It basically just says when you must have a DUA, when you might not necessarily need a DUA. So maybe you already have a confidentiality agreement and you're only talking about transferring data that's completely de-identified, that doesn't have anything to do with patients. Those can usually be transferred under an NDA. We don't have to have a data use agreement. We don't have to go through both agreements in place. I'm happy to share this document with anyone who'd like access to it after the presentation. Next slide, please. Just a couple common quick terms that you're going to see in any data use agreement. The type of data you're transferring. I've seen everything from transportation data all the way up to full patient healthcare data. The duration of the term in which you can use the data or the recipient can use the data. Any kind of project specifications, publication requirements. This is going to be important in MTAs as well as data use agreements. If you're working with another institution, how are you going to publish? Who's going to be the named authors? Formatting instructions for how the data is going to be transferred. Disposal instructions. This is also included in an MTA. At the end of the project, how do you dispose of the material? How do you dispose of the data? Security requirements, and then again, liability language similar to an MTA is what happens if there's a data breach. Who's going to be responsible for that? Next slide, please. And again, what do you need to do if you need a data use agreement? If you think you might need a data use agreement, please feel free to call me, send me an email, and I can ask you a couple questions. We'll figure out exactly what you need. The data use agreement template, the cover page that you see on your screen, this is the FDP template. This is another template we try to use for all data use agreements because it has been widely accepted. It's very easy to use. However, the template does change on the type of data, based on the type of data that you are transferring. So you can reach out to me and I can help you determine which agreement you're going to need. And next slide. And finally, just here is my email on the screen. If you have any questions about MTAs or data use agreements, if you don't know if you need an MTA or a data use agreement, but you think you might, please feel free to reach out to me at any time and I can walk you through that process.
Wonderful. Thank you, Allie. All right, up next, we have Jessica Heskell, who's the Executive Director of the Clinical Research Support Office. I'm here to talk about clinical trial contract and budget basics. So Jessica, take it away.
Thanks. You can go to the next slide. Actually, one more. So I know you guys are getting a lot of information thrown at you today. So if you only remember one thing from my part of the presentation, it is that everything in an industry-sponsored clinical trial budget can be negotiated. You have to make sure you're covering all of your costs. So what are some of those costs? Next slide. I've listed a few here that are our institutionally required costs, including our IRB fee, our Medicare analysis fee, and F&A. A few others that are considered more optional, but you absolutely have to budget for are all your startup fees, your closeout fees, supply costs, per patient costs, anything that is going to be charged to your account or take you time has to be built into your budget. Next slide. So a few additional considerations that might be less common, but absolutely should be considered are like pre-screening effort, your screen failures, if there's shipping, if you've contracted with CCTS or not. IDS will give you charges if you are using them for your drug management. So UK, we're not in the business of making money off of industry-sponsored trials. However, you can and should negotiate your prices above your current cost to cover your estimated future costs. So you have to think about staff raises, estimated inflation for procedures and supplies, really looking at how long the trial is going to go and how much it's going to cost, not just today, but at the end of the study. Next slide. So what does the overall process look like from your side? So once the NDA is finalized, the sponsor is going to share your protocol, your budget, your contract, a number of other study documents. You need to send those documents to OSPA and you need to send them to the CRSO. So the CRSO starts working right away on your Medicare analysis. You need this before you can finalize your budget. You need us to tell you what might be billed to insurance and what absolutely has to be billed to the sponsor. Similarly, OSPA wants to begin work, and they're going to talk in more detail about what that looks like a little later today, but especially on that contract negotiation. You want to give them as much time as possible to get that done. So the full process of analyzing a protocol and building a budget is going to take a lot longer to explain than I have today. So I do want to just point out we have some recorded trainings on the CRSO website that go into much greater detail about all the things you need to consider when building that budget. And additionally, the CRSO can provide up to 2 hours of free consulting on an individual budget if you need assistance, or you can actually hire us in collaboration with the CCTS to do the full study startup, including budget building on a fee-for-service basis. So after you've fully estimated all of your costs, you send the budget to the sponsor, you start that negotiation process. And these negotiations can take some time and sometimes require some additional documentation. So there are a number of great resources, not just on our website, but on OSPA's website, RFS's website. If they've got questions about, validating the F&A rate, confirming fees are in fact institutional, looking at fringe rates. It's all documented. I'm happy to point you in the right direction if you ever get any questions. My contact information is already in this presentation. And of course, happy to help in any way that I can. When your budget is final, you're going to need to route the EIF and inform your contact in OSPA that your budget's been finalized. Next slide. So again, knowing your protocol is critical. You have to be able to capture all of your costs. And even though there are many standard fees, at the end of the day, every budget's going to be very different. So I will say one more time, just to reiterate, right? Everything can be negotiated. You can add lines. So if something you need isn't on the template, add it. You can add costs. You can increase costs. You can adjust costs. You want it to best represent what it's going to cost us at UK to do this study. No matter what, we are not in the business of subsidizing industry-sponsored clinical trials. So hand it off. Now to Emily.
All right. Thank you, Jessica. And I do want to add that she has contact information here as well as some additional resource slides that again will be a part of this presentation. Wonderful resources. All right, so up next, continuing with clinical trials, we have Emily Beggs, who is a senior research administrator with OSPA, to walk us through OSPA's role within clinical trial agreements. So Emily, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Chelsea. You can go to the next slide. Awesome. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Emily Beggs. I'm on OSPA's contracts team. And today I'm going to briefly be discussing what a clinical trial agreement is and OSPA's involvement in the negotiation and trial startup process. Before I go through each of the types of clinical trial agreements, clinical trials are an important part of the approval process to bring a drug or device to market. A clinical trial agreement, or CTA, describes and acknowledges each party's responsibilities in the performance of a clinical trial, including but not limited to terms of collaboration, requirements for payment, publication, IP, indemnification, and subject injury. And the resolution of these contractual issues does require coordination between the sponsor, the PI department, OSPA, and often other UK offices as well. And the involvement of each party is essential to a successful negotiation with mutually acceptable terms. So the types of clinical trial agreements that OSPA manages includes clinical trial agreements directly with an industry funding source. These can be sponsor or PI initiated. We also deal quite often with clinical trial subawards that originate from another university. These are typically federal flow-through dollars. However, we have seen other sources of funding as well. Clinical trial master agreements, which include non-study specific terms and conditions and allow for multiple studies to be opened up underneath that master via study specific task orders. Master agreements are great because they can greatly speed up the study startup process because most of the terms have already been negotiated. I will say on the master agreements that they can take a little bit longer to negotiate at times because we have to consider every single possible study that could fall under that master. But once they are finally negotiated, they are a great thing to have. Study startup agreements, these can occur when negotiations are canceled prior to the execution of a full CTA. And it is a mechanism for UK to recover hopefully most of their startup costs. And then lastly, compassionate use and expanded access protocol agreements, which are a pathway for a patient to access treatment outside of a clinical trial. OSPA will review these agreements if there is external funding involved. Next slide, please. And then what does OSPA need in order to initiate a CTA negotiation? First of all, please let us know as soon as possible in the process. We ask for an editable Word version of the CTA for review and redline. If you don't have one, we can reach out to the sponsor and request one. A copy of the protocol, the sponsor's contact information. If it's easier, it's great if you can just forward us the original email from the sponsor that provided all of those documents. This helps us make sure we're looking at all of the documents that have been provided. Sometimes, for example, there is a clinical trial agreement as well as a letter of indemnification. We need a copy of the budget. And then for timeline goals, our goal is to send initial revisions within 7 business days of receipt of a contract draft. And then, as I believe I mentioned earlier, OSPA does collaborate with other offices as necessary for guidance on specific contractual terms. And those offices include OTC, legal, risk management, and ORI. Next slide, please. And lastly, what does OSPA need prior to the negotiation of a CTA? We need final CTA terms and conditions, a final budget, which I know Jessica Heskell touched on. This is negotiated by the PI in the department. And then please let us know when that's final. Fully routed IAF, IRB approval, or no IRB approval memo if you are asking for the CTA to be signed prior to IRB approval. In special circumstances. And then if a central IRB is used, a copy of the UK Reliance approval letter and the central IRB study-specific approval letter. If you have questions regarding what documents are needed when a CIRB is used, please feel free to reach out to me for questions. The the look of these documents can vary greatly. And so sometimes we have to piece things together to get what we need. And this concludes my portion. Thank you for your time, and I'll turn it back over to Chelsea for the next presenter.
Wonderful. Thank you, Emily, for running through that and how OSPA supports clinical trial agreements. All right, so up next, we have Mary Gay Whitmer. She is the pre-award manager for the new Healthcare Hub 2 under the newly formed Collaborative Grant Services. So Mary Gay, I will pass it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Chelsea. And I'm going to run through these slides quickly. So I'm not going to cover all of the content here. And I think what I'm going to do is basically say, just like Jessica Heskell was trying to, sort of boil things down for the information you really need to know. The two things you need to know about us. Number one, we help with the IAF. That's the internal approval form. And that was what Emily Beggs just referenced. And that is important because OSPA needs a fully routed IAF to be able to sign your agreement. So we play an important role here. Want to make sure that you know we exist. Our name is now the Collaborative Grant Services Office, CGS. Second thing I'll talk about at the end is how to contact us. You can always contact me, so feel free, and I'll get you to the right grant specialist. So without further ado, the first slide here, just wanted to make sure that everyone is aware, if you've heard of Project Gateway, to basically consolidate the college grant officer research administration functions in the college, that's what our office is. So if you've heard of Gateway, the purpose of Gateway, one of the purposes was to create our office, CGS. Next slide. Now, there's a lot of information on this slide. The reason that this is here, I just want to make sure that everybody knows that we know that when you're dealing with the contracting process, regardless of if it's clinical trials or if it's a different kind of agreement, there are going to be a lot of different offices involved. So I want to make sure you all know that what we do is basically compile the internal approvals with the IAF to make sure that everybody, including your co-Is, their chairs, all the colleges involved, everybody understands what the project is and the budget impact that it has. So that's really what we do. And if you ever have a question and you're not sure whether we're involved or not, please contact us and we're glad to help get you to the right place if we're not where you should be. Next slide. So as some of you know, the Gateway project has 3 different phases. Phase 2 just started today. And what that means is the various colleges on campus are joining our CGS office in phases. And so phase 1 was the College of Medicine. You'll see here listed, and then also engineering and the colleges and institutes, the centers and institutes that report to the VPR. Phase 2 just started on Monday, and you will see that the remainder of those units that are non-healthcare related, those colleges, are now officially in our office. Phase 3 will populate the remainder of the healthcare hub and also stand up a complex grants hub. And so without getting into too much detail here, I want to make sure you know our office is CGS. And if you have a question about who to contact, number one, you can go to our website, or certainly you can contact me. And I'm going to give you one other way to contact our office here at the end of the presentation. But I just wanted to make sure that you all know, even though this is a big office, we want to make it easy for you all to contact us, and feel free to contact us. Next slide. Okay, you'll see we have an organizational chart here, and you will see I'm in the healthcare hub. I realize that some contracts are going to come through the other hub. That is the non-healthcare hub, Hub 1. Again, if you have questions about which hub your college is located in, feel free to contact me or go to our website. Next slide. Okay, and I'm sure that many of you have been through some gateway trainings, various gateway calls to talk about some of the changes. The important thing here is I just wanted to make sure we have the slide so you know that even though I'm the pre-award manager, we also provide post-award support as well. And this is for accounts that are not clinical trials currently. But I want to make sure that everybody is aware that we have both pre-award and post-award support. Next slide. Okay, and so like I said, I want to make sure that you know how to contact our office. So if you have a contract that has external funding from a source obviously outside of UK, then very likely you are going to need an IAF, the internal approval form, and you are likely going to need to work with our office. If you're a clinical trial, that can vary, but that's okay. Err on the side of contacting us. If we need to coordinate with Jessica and her office, we can certainly do that. The last way that you can contact our office is via our website. And what you can do is fill out a proposal initiation form. It's a tab at the top of our website, and it has just 5-6 just basic questions. And what that will do is it will start the process with our office. We will get back with you within 24 to 48 hours. You also can email us at the email address that you see here on the screen. We will help you walk through the process. I could spend a couple of hours telling you all about the process without a break, but certainly we won't do that today. Next slide. Great, here is a link to our website, and here is my contact information. If you have any questions after this call that you think might be in my purview, feel free to reach out to us. And thank you, Chelsea, so much for putting this together.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mary Gay. I did want to highlight one thing on the proposal initiation form in collaboration with our office, Innovation Connect. Some of you may have submitted a proposal initiation form. There actually is a checkbox that if you are working with an industry sponsor, maybe on a sponsored research project, if you do have an external collaborator that is a corporate or nonprofit, please do click that, because then I get informed and I can also get involved to help support the process, potentially speaking with the company, negotiating, and being a partner with Mary Gay and anyone else that needs to get involved. So just wanted to let everyone know that, again, if you are working with an external partner, please make sure to click that, and you get another person on your team to help you. All right, so with that, I'm going to kick it over to Kim Carter, who is the Executive Director of OSPA. And so Kim, I'll send it over to you and just let me know when to advance the slides.
Great. Thank you so much, Chelsea. I'm really happy to be with you this afternoon. I've learned a bit already, and I look forward to even more information coming my way. So I wanted to let you know that OSPA handles funded agreements from external sponsors that support our faculty and our staff in their research and scholarly activities. Those sponsor projects involve, but they're not really limited to, basic and applied research, evaluation, training and curriculum development, testing and services that are coming to us from companies where our investigators use their intellectual input to get results for the company, public service and community outreach programs, and clinical trials. The sponsors that provide that funding come from the federal government, local and state governments, nonprofit organizations such as private foundations, and for-profit companies. The funds come to us in the form of a grant, which we're not talking about today, and contracts. And those agreements obligate the university to perform a specific scope of work or provide specific deliverables, to only use the funds the sponsor is providing us for allowable expenses. We're required to report on our technical performance and progress, And we need to provide financial and other reports showing that we've complied with any applicable regulations and sponsor policies. So our team, the OSPA contracts team, supports investigators and the university to ensure that the proposals that are submitted to these sponsors adhere to university and sponsor policies. So I want to clarify that many projects supported by a contract do not follow the normal proposal submission process. They are instead funded by a for-profit company, for example, based on the company's knowledge of the investigator's specific expertise or the patient population that's available for testing at UK when they want us to test their drugs. The contracts team focuses on contract review and negotiation. That's where they spend most of their time. They negotiate the contracts to make sure that they fit within the university's preferred positions and ensure that any clauses within the contracts are acceptable, meaning we can legally comply with those contractual requirements. They also confirm with the PI that the scope of work can be done and the amount of funding provided is sufficient to do that scope of work, and that the work can be completed within the period of performance of the contract. They also confirm approval of the IRB or the IACUC and receipt of that completed IAF internal approval form that has been mentioned a couple times already in today's conversation. And then they establish the corresponding sponsored project account. So as I stated earlier, OSPA's contracts team staff review and negotiate the contracts. However, I am the university's authorized signatory for all sponsored project agreements, including the contracts that we're discussing. So as a reminder, faculty are not authorized to sign sponsored projects agreements, and they wouldn't want to do so because they take on significant personal liability when they sign those agreements. Next slide, please. So as you can see on the slide, there are a number of different funded contracts that are handled by OSPA, and I'm going to skip a couple of them because Emily has already referred to them, but I'll start with Memorandum of Understanding. So MOUs are used to formalize collaborations and partnerships between entities. So the MOU clearly defines the purpose of the collaboration and outlines the specific objectives and goals that the parties want to achieve through their joint efforts. It also specifies the roles and responsibilities of each party. Most common MOU is a teaming agreement. So a teaming agreement is used to outline the responsibilities of parties submitting a collaborative proposal. And I'm going to pause just for a second because someone's drilling or something. Just 1 second. Okay, I think it's quieted down. Thank you. Typically, the teaming agreement ends when the proposal is submitted, but it does reference the fact that another agreement will be entered into if the proposal is funded. Sponsored research agreements are the sort of the general bucket of agreements that OSPA handles. So they're formal contracts that outline the terms and conditions under which the research activities are going to be conducted. So as with other contracts, their primary purpose is to define the rights, the obligations, and the expectations of the parties that are involved. So just to be clear, OSPA handles all of these externally funded contracts. A federal contract is an example of a sponsored research agreement, and they are subject to the specific regulations and requirements of the federal government. And the federal government's objective in issuing the contracts is to ensure transparency, fairness, accountability, and to procure a specific service. So they typically include a very detailed scope of work with deliverables and extensive reporting requirements. There's little flexibility really in being able to revise the scope or lessen the frequency of reporting. We are usually able to accept the terms and conditions of federal contracts, so there's little negotiation involved for us. Recently, however, with the federal government's interest in research security, we have seen some additional need to engage in negotiations or at least discussions with the sponsor. Right now, most typically DoD, Department of Defense, and DOE, Department of Energy, related to those new federal regulations and some of the language that's now included in their contracts. Testing and service agreements. So we know that UK's faculty often possess specialized expertise in a particular field or discipline, and sponsors want to seek that knowledge and skills to be able to achieve their goals. So they may need our specific skills to test, analyze, or provide services for the research that they want conducted. They also can give us testing and service agreements in order to gain access to the university's advanced laboratories, our equipment, our research facilities. So these testing and service agreements formalize the obligations of both parties, and they provide the funding to cover the costs associated with the testing and service work that the university is engaged in. I think Emily did an excellent job of explaining clinical trial agreements and master agreements. So I'll briefly touch on subcontracts. So they're used when another entity receives a prime award and they need the University of Kentucky's expertise to conduct a significant part of the research effort. They flow down all of the requirements of the prime award to UK. We typically have to provide reports that get incorporated into the reports that they provide to their prime sponsor. And we also can sometimes be co-authors on publications. So we are working very collaboratively with that other entity to complete the work that they had funded. Next slide, please. So fixed price and cost reimbursable contracts are two common types of contractual arrangements that are used in sponsored projects. The University of Kentucky most often sees cost reimbursement contracts, but we also have fixed fee. Each has distinct characteristics that determine how the costs are managed, how the risks are handled, and then how the payment is structured. So I'll briefly state that fixed price contracts, the contract price, of course, upfront is predetermined and it remains fixed regardless of how much cost the university actually incurs. So in those cases, we have to have a well-defined scope of work, and we have to make sure that we can do the work that is specified in the contract with the amount of money that's in that fixed price contract. If the actual costs for performing the project are higher than anticipated, we, the university, must absorb the additional costs. A cost reimbursable contract, on the other hand, reimburses UK for the actual costs incurred during the project. They have flexibility in terms of revising the scope of work if necessary, and if there is an overage of the cost of getting the scope of work done, the sponsoring entity actually bears the risk of those cost overruns because it's agreed to pay the actual costs of the project. We recommend that an investigator, when they're having discussions with a for-profit company about perhaps doing work for them and bringing a contract to the university, when they're asked to submit a budget to the company, that they present it as a fixed price budget. For internal purposes, we would need a detailed budget, but it saves conversation about institutional rates such as fringe benefits and F&A costs if the amount is presented as a fixed price. Next slide, please. So as I said, contract staff spend most of their time negotiating. We do negotiate some clauses over and over again because they're important to get right in terms of the negotiations, and because we have specific restrictions or limitations given the type of institution that we are. And we also work closely with other units across campus as we're doing those negotiations with OTC, legal counsel, ORI, and other units. We do require, as has been mentioned previously, that fully routed and signed IAF, as well as the final budget, the agreed upon scope of work, and then any compliance approvals in order to sign the contract. Next slide, please. So this is our OSPA contracts team. Mary Hickman is our OSPA director with oversight over the contracts and subaward team. Sylvia Brown is new to OSPA. She is our new contracts team lead. And then we have several contracts team staff, Emily Beggs, who you've met, Suzanne Drummond, Sarah Pohl, Carol Simpson is coming soon. And then we do still have vacant positions that we are filling. If you have any questions about the contract staff and what they do, as well as any questions about a specific contract that you're working on or trying to get an account set up for, please feel free to reach out to any one of us. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kim, so much for that great overview of OSPA. All right, and last but certainly not least, we have two representatives, Ella Dunbar and Katie Hagan, from the Office of Legal Counsel to cover common contracts and agreements that they deal with. So Ella, I will kick it over to you.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm Ella Dunbar and I'm Assistant General Counsel for Research and Intellectual Property. I've been in my office about 4 years now, and then I work with Katie Hagan, who I'll let introduce herself.
Hi all, Katie Hagan here, Assistant General Counsel. I work alongside Ella and our other colleague, David Kinsella.
So as Chelsea said, last but not least, we are the stop for all of your agreements that do not fit within somebody else's office. So for memorandums of understanding, I know Kim just touched on this as far as OSPA goes. OSPA is going to handle funded MOUs. Those unfunded ones are going to come to us. MOUs are contracts that can be used to formalize relationships and set forth some broad expectations and future goals between the parties without obligating either one to specific contractual terms. Those are often then followed on later with more specific arrangements that give more details about each party's responsibilities. These can be between UK and another entity, or we also sometimes do MOUs between two entities at UK just to formalize a relationship or understanding between those units. MOUs do not specifically address the transfer of materials in general. That would be an MTA. You would bother OTC for that. They do not only contain confidentiality obligations, that would be an NDA and would also go to OTC, but MOUs can contain confidentiality obligations or can address the future exchange of materials, just not at very specific levels. If your department is getting external funding, again, that would go to OSPA, but if you are not exchanging money under one of these agreements, those would come through our office and Katie or I would handle those. Next slide, please.
Consortium agreements, these can be between other universities or also include industry partners. These agreements may or may not involve members paying a membership fee to join the consortium and can offer various levels of involvement within the consortium itself. Initial consortium agreements are unfunded from a sponsored project's perspective, but may contemplate future funded projects, which would then have to go through OSPA. It's important if you're sending one of these types of agreements to OSPA to make sure it's clear that the project is under the umbrella of a consortium arrangement and to provide the overarching agreement to your contact in OSPA for them to understand the context. Next slide, please.
Business associate agreements, BAAs are an agreement between a covered entity and its a business associate. They handle data that falls under HIPAA. Those are required when UK healthcare or another covered component of UK has someone who's not a member of our workforce perform services for UK healthcare and where PHI is required to perform those services. I won't get into the technicalities of BAAs, but if you do think that you need one, please ask our colleague Erin McMahon on our health affairs team to help you with that. Next slide, please.
Emergency use INDs and IDEs. This is when you want to use an investigational drug or device for an off-label purpose. These situations involve both the legal office research team and the risk management team to make an assessment of the necessity for applying for an FDA authorization for INDs and IDEs. Because these are emergency situations and are time sensitive, if you need documentation put in place for one of these, please contact our office as soon as possible. That way we can expeditiously assist with the application. Next slide, please.
Unfunded collaboration research agreements. These are kind of similar to MOUs. An unfunded collaboration research agreement is contract that establishes rights and responsibilities of research collaborators working together on a project where no funds are exchanged between the collaborators. These can include the exchange of in-kind support, like tangible research materials, supplies, software, or it may involve a no-cost loan of equipment or lab space. These types of agreements are one of the more confusing types of contracts that come through our offices. Even though there is no funding and therefore these agreements do not go through OSPA, UK still has to make sure that our rights are adequately represented and our obligations are clear. So this is often a group effort shared between OTC and the legal office and other offices, depending on what's contemplated within the agreement, because these often address intellectual property concerns or material sharing. If you have a sponsored agreement and you're setting up an unfunded agreement that is related to that sponsored arrangement, then you do have to disclose in-kind support as other support. And OSPA's website has an explanation of when that disclosure is necessary. Next slide, please.
Software licensing for research and in-licensing of software for research purposes. If you are using outside software, so outside of the university, software that is developed outside of UK, you're going to need a license to use that software unless it's public domain or something that's described in the bottom bullet of this slide. You'll need to contact our office to review a licensing agreement for that. And if you're paying to obtain any software, purchasing is going to have to be involved, but go ahead and email us so we can figure out where it needs to go. Next slide, please.
So agreeing to terms and conditions of software or on websites and other places. Many websites require acceptance of click-through terms and conditions in order to create an account or make a purchase. These terms and conditions, even though it's very easy to click through and accept them, these do still constitute a contract and should be reviewed by our office or by purchasing prior to acceptance. Please, please, please do not just click accept without requesting review from our offices. Next slide, please.
Purchase agreements and vendor relationships. If you are purchasing something for your research or establishing a relationship with a vendor to continue to get objects for your research, you're going to need to contact our office or purchasing. It depends on what it is and how much it is, but because UK is considered part of the state, there's specific state law considerations regarding purchasing and purchasing contracts. If you're paying money for something, even if it's going on a pro card or being purchased through some other mechanism, please be sure to first ask that purchasing approve the transaction.
And we know that's a lot of information and we do a lot of things. So if you have any questions, you're welcome to contact me or Katie by email or also David Kinsella, who we work with closely. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ella and Katie. So really quickly before we get to Q&A, I know we're running short on time. I did want to plug 2 events that UK Innovate /OTC is promoting. Rohan will drop the registration links for this. So we have a UK Women Innovators Networking event coming up on March 19th. And then we also have the Kentucky Innovator Challenge that the Innovation Connect team is hosting. We're going to have a variety of external industry partners coming. They're going to be sharing their problems that are best solved through collaboration. And so again, I'm not gonna stay on these, but my colleague Kendra will be doing Q&A. Again, I know we're short on time. So if people have to drop off, completely understand. And that if any questions don't get answered, we'll be certain to follow up. So Kendra, if you could.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Chelsea. So this question is going to be for Allie. It says, if we have a sub-award agreement with another institution for a federally funded grant, do we still need a DUA to share data with that institution? And then what about if both institutions are operating under a single site IRB?
The IRB, wouldn't matter at all. So even if there is a single IRB, you're still going to need a data use agreement if it's going in between institutions, if data is. As far as if it's a sub-agreement, that really depends on what your sub-agreement would say. So I would reach out to whoever negotiated the sub-agreement and worked with you in OSPA and just ask them if the sub-agreements has mentions at all the data transfer. If it doesn't, then yes, you would need a data use agreement in place.
Perfect, thank you. And then our last question, what is OSPA's general timeline for contract review, approval, and execution? Is there a way for administrators, PIs, and teams to see where a contract is in the OSPA process?
So I'll answer that one. So we are working right now with Research Information Services to develop a contract tracking system to bring visibility to the status of contracts as they flow through OSPA and to where you get your accounts set up. We don't have a timeline yet. Those conversations are in early stages. We do realize that right now that we do not have that online visibility. However, you are always welcome to reach out to anyone on the contracts team and specifically to your research administrator to find out the status of a specific contract.
Perfect, thank you. Chelsea, do we have time for one more question?
Sure, well, we can take one more. Yep.
Okay, last question. Again, regarding DUAs, what about open data policies from journals and data repositories?
Nope, is Allie there?
We can follow up through email.
Sorry,
yeah.
no, I'm sorry. Can you say that one more time?
In regards to DUAs, the question says, what about open data policies from journals and data repositories?
So those are a little different, and that's going to be, again, that's only going to deal with de-identified data. And a lot of repositories have data use agreements that they require you to sign. That, again, that would be, when you sign, it's going to be OTC is going to sign that on behalf of the university. And a lot of times the researcher will have to acknowledge it as well. But for example, we have several data repositories where if you are giving them access to your data, you have to sign away on the university will let them know that we're okay with that being freely available. There are usually publication requirements that they'll post on the repository's website, things along that nature. But very similarly, if you're getting data from a repository, a lot of times you're going to have to sign a data use agreement because the repository has terms that they've agreed to with the original supplier of the data. All of those can come to me in an OTC.
Wonderful. Thank you, Allie. Well, I know we're over time. I just want to say thank you again so much to our speakers today. I know we covered a lot of information. If anyone on the call has follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I can help direct them. Again, we will be sharing the slides. The recording will be available, so you'll be able to look back and review, share with colleagues. If you have a specific question directed, towards a DUA or clinical trial, I believe that most of our participants share their contact information. So just want to say thank you again for everyone. And we know that contracts can be complicated and confusing, but we have a rock star team that all works together to try and make this as simple as possible. So thank you all for your time.